Good day, good people. Thank you for pressing the start button so that I could be with you, at least virtually and asynchronously. My name is Marc DelMonico, and I am a director at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I work in the Secretariat of Catholic Education, and I resource the USCCB Subcommittee on Certification for Ecclesial Ministry and Service. That name is so long you'll likely hear me refer to it during this presentation only as the Subcommittee on Certification or just the Subcommittee. If I said the whole title for each mention, I'd be out of time. But I'm glad to be with you wherever you are in the world today and wherever you're watching this. I recorded this in mid-June of 2020 at the request of NPM's President Steve Petrunek. Thank you, Steve, for allowing me to be here to do this. For your virtual conference in July of 2020. I'm just providing the date should another terrible society-shaking calamity befall us before you see this, so you don't think I'm insensitive to it. This is the moment we live in when providing that context at the start of a video may be viewed now or years from now. It's sadly necessary. But in all seriousness, please know that wherever you are today, whatever your situation in ministry or in life, and with a prayerful awareness of the heaviness of this moment of pandemic and our nation's reckoning with systemic racism and our churches reckoning with it as well, I greet you in the spirit and say, as I always do when I begin a talk like this, a phrase which I learned from St. Francis of Assisi: God give you peace. Now, as you can see, I've moved into the corner here so you can see my slides as I walk and talk virtually to you through them. This is a new format for me to present in, and all of us are still getting used to what it means to be interactive in this context, something which I enjoy doing in my presentation. So while I can't do that live with you today, if you have questions for me, I've included my email info at the bottom of each slide, so you can reach me with questions or comments, and you can even reach out to my personal Twitter account, which I've given there, so follow me and say hi. I also hope to be able to provide the PowerPoint slides as a PDF to NPM so that they can get that to you as well. So I'm actually in attendance virtually for the days of NPM's July convention, so our paths may cross during those live events. As someone who has sung with music ministers for many years and someone who's served in the roles of song leader and cantor, I am so very grateful for the work of NPM, and I'm glad to be here talking about my work with the subcommittee of the Bishops' Conference and how we work with NPM in support of ministry formation overall, and specifically for the certification of Director of Music Ministries with NPM. Now, your work as leaders in music ministry has, I know, been turned upside down by this pandemic and the health restrictions related to singing to prevent possible spread of the COVID virus. But the vital colleagueship and connections here at this event and the difficult but visionary work I know you are doing in these days is a true essential service to the liturgical life of the Church and to its mission. Thank you for all you're doing. I also know many of you are dealing with job reductions or job losses at this time. You know, over these months, we've been sharing resources with NPM and other ministry organizations we work with to provide strategic thought resources about ministry, restructuring, new development, responses during COVID. And we're sharing those resources we found, which we know to be good, vetted resources with Steve and with other ministry organization leaders. And we've also been sharing NPM's COVID resources with others too. I especially appreciate the efforts of NPM to correlate its own strategic planning to the needs during this difficult time and the resources the leadership team has gathered, all those links that you see here on the page. We're all being challenged to think in creative and untested ways and learning as we go these days. Let's continue to entrust that work to the Holy Spirit, who is driving us forward in hope, even when it seems we have often not much on which to build that hope. Fortunately, the Holy Spirit is the generator of hope and new life, and we pray to discern the Spirit's will in our ongoing work. So I'm here to talk a bit with you about how our USCCB subcommittee is a resource for ministry formation best practices and certification. And as we journey through these uncertain times, certainly the role of well-formed collaborative leaders in ministry is definitely more important than ever before. Also, when I give presentations like this, I always find it helpful to clarify my work at the Bishops' Conference and how the conference itself works. As a staff person at the conference, which works with one subcommittee of the conference, I don't have the capacity, nor do I speak for all the bishops. All of us who staff the various committees and subcommittees work closely together, and together we provide resourcing, research, information, and advocacy for our individual committees and subcommittees, as well as the body of bishops as a whole. But ultimately, we're in service to them, and we resource them, and they determine and chart the decisions of the conference. Thus, I always like to say, I work for bishops. I'm not an official spokesman for them, for which they are probably grateful. Be that as it may, I can speak about the work of the Subcommittee on Certification, and I'm glad to talk about it, and the relationship NPM and other national ministry organizations, as well as several diocesan lay ministry formation programs, have with the subcommittee. However, before I speak further, I'll let our chairman speak for himself. Bishop Gerald Kakanis is Emeritus Bishop of Tucson and was instrumental in the work of what was then the Bishop's Subcommittee on the Laity to produce the USCCB statement, Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, a resource to guide the development of lay ecclesial ministry. That was in 2005. That document, which I'll turn to momentarily, is a foundation for our subcommittee's work in resourcing best practices for ministry formation and certification. I want to share an excerpt of a video of Bishop Kakanis, which is part of a larger conversation I had with him and several representatives from national organizations and diocesan programs whose certification standards for ministry have been approved by our subcommittee. In the excerpt, he talks about the work of the subcommittee and the importance of lay ecclesial ministry in the continuing mission and ministry of the church in the United States.
You know, one of the great blessings of Vatican II was understanding that the role of the laity is not just in the marketplace, but also in service to the church itself. And since then, a plethora of lay ministries have evolved in the life of the church. And one of the things that is critical is that those to whom bishops entrust significant parts of pastoral care in their communities be entrusted to people who are qualified, who have the necessary background, skills, and competencies to make sure that their ministry is really at the service of God's people. And one of the purposes of the Subcommittee for Certification for Ecclesial Ministry and Service is to help bishops to be assured that those who are engaged in ministry in their parishes and in ministry organizations are getting the background, training, and necessary competencies to do their work well.
So I hope that video from Bishop Kakanis indicates the importance of the value of lay ecclesial ministry and preparation of lay people and others in specialized roles in the work of our subcommittee. And there's a short link that will take you to the full video here. There are other videos we hope to roll out soon with some other conversation partners that we had in that larger interview. But Bishop Kakanis' points help to identify some of the things I'll be speaking about with you in more detail today. First, I'll briefly touch upon co-workers in the Vineyard and the importance of that document for the work of the Bishop's Subcommittee on Certification. I'd love to spend more time on that here, but I will restrain myself in the interest of highlighting other things I know are also important to all of you, specifically for NPM. So I'll speak a little bit about co-workers and about how important pieces of that document guide the subcommittee's mandate. I'll talk about the need for lay ecclesial ministers and other ministers in specialized leadership roles, and the growth that has happened there, and how we must maintain and build upon the foundations laid in that document, which in turn was formed by the history and theological and pastoral scholarship on lay ministry practice, which goes all the way back to the Second Vatican Council. Can't get into all those things, but want to at least mention it. Second, I'll address the collaborative work of the subcommittee, indicating how we resource preparation of lay ecclesial ministry and other leaders through approved certification offerings, and how that's a vital part of our work in the church today, even as we struggle. And especially all of you as music ministers and music ministry leaders struggle, especially now with the impact of COVID-19 on the very shape and heart of your ministries. And finally, I'll focus on how NPM works within the 5-member Alliance for the Certification for Lay Ecclesial Ministers, and discuss the certification in Director of Music Ministries that the Alliance offers through NPM. We'll review the process of certification and the ways in which the competencies NPM has identified can ground formation, not only of those being certified as Director of Music Ministry, but can help music ministers in general to be formed in that rich theological and ministerial practice of composing and enacting liturgical music that is musically rich, theologically appropriate, and pastorally astute. Hopefully along the way I'll answer some questions you may have as well, or point you to resources that can provide further guidance. And again, you can always reach out to the NPM leadership team or to me directly for follow-up. So first, let me chat briefly about the 2005 document from the USCCB, Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord. It's available as a free download in English and Spanish at those links, and you can also get hard copies of either from the USCCB store. As the bishop mentioned in his video, our work is grounded in that document. It helped bring together and synthesize a lot of developments in the area of lay ecclesial ministry, including theological foundations for it, and best practices for assessing the call, formation, recognition, and authorization of lay ecclesial ministers in leadership roles. It provides resources to help bishops, programs of graduate study in Catholic ministry and theology, and diocesan ministry formation leaders. It helps them to affirm the call of those lay people, placing their baptismal God-given charisms in service to the mission and ministry of the whole church. And as we think about that co-workers document during this year, 2020, which is the 15th anniversary of the bishops issuing that text, we do know that there's still much work to do, both in terms of implementing its vision and further synthesizing the fruits of the efforts of theologians and lay ministers to build upon its foundation over these years. But for that effort of continued improvement in developing practices to go forward, it helps to know the material. So I encourage all of you who have not had a chance to read Co-workers, or maybe read it a long time ago, to maybe reread it, perhaps in a parish ministry group or with others in your field of ministry. I'll also mention that the National Association for Lay Ministry, one of the partners with NPM in the Alliance for the Certification of Lay Ecclesial Ministers, has a study guide with questions for reflection on co-workers that could be used. And you can get that from NALM at the link there, and they're very inexpensive, so take advantage. I'll also mention that since 2005, the USCCB has been active in continuing to resource lay ecclesial ministry on a conference-wide basis, with these being just a few examples with links to those events where you can learn more. And I'll add that we're thinking about how to build on the success of co-workers, even in our work with the related Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth. We're discussing how the document might be updated. However, even as we do that, Catholic leaders in other countries are also learning more about co-workers for the first time, and it's having a very positive impact literally around the world. One example I can share is that in 2018, representing our bishops' conference, I was invited to participate in a week-long gathering of lay leaders and some of their collaborating bishops for a first-of-a-kind gathering in Rome, sponsored by the Dicastery on Laity, Family, and Life. The purpose was to share best practices for forming the laity in the life of faith. There were 42 of us from countries all across the globe. As you can see, our wonderfully diverse group, we got to meet Pope Francis after his Wednesday general audience, and we were especially encouraged by him in our work. You can see me in the back row there at the red arrow. The meetings themselves were also very instructive, and I posted the findings and parts of my own report to the conference on my personal website. That was a little easier to work with at the time. So if you go to my personal website link there, you'll learn more about the whole experience, and hope you would enjoy seeing that and experiencing it vicariously. Anyway, all the delegations from the 15 countries presented on their work. Our delegation's presentation included information about co-workers and the Alliance and the work being done to form lay ministry leaders. That presentation was very well received because I quickly ran out of all the copies of the materials I brought because everyone wanted the copy of the document and the materials about the Alliance and the organizations. So even as we in the U.S. seek to be better as an institutional church in recognizing the importance of well-formed lay ecclesial ministry leaders and in supporting them more in concrete ways, both the whole church and other national churches are learning from what we've done. And that isn't my work. It belongs to everyone who has fostered the development of lay ecclesial ministry in any way across many decades, especially in the areas of formation and competency. And so that area of formation and acknowledging competencies is specifically where the work of the Subcommittee on Certification is focused. One of the most significant aspects of co-workers is that in it, the bishops recognize and affirm that those who are in leadership and ministry should be prepared in the best possible way for that role, and that the church should do what it can to promote and foster that formation. So such preparation involves 4 dimensions of formation, which you see here. The human, understanding oneself, one's agency, the ability to empathize, to relate to and lead others. There's the spiritual, understanding and deepening a personal relationship with God, with Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, and recognizing and acting on the implications of those relationships. The intellectual, learning and understanding the development of doctrine and theology in the history of the church, the role of church teaching, theological reflection, and the ability to think critically and carefully about all of that and apply it to ministry. And finally, the pastoral, learning skills necessary to practice ministry thoughtfully within an ethos of care and collaboratively with other ministers. In addition, although it's barely mentioned in co-workers, the importance of learning skills and capabilities to understand, appreciate, and adapt pastoral strategies in light of the various cultural experiences of the church, church life, and ministry is essential. Its importance has only gotten more pronounced since co-workers was approved. So furthermore, recognizing the ways in which those intercultural competencies invite critical reflection on one's self, one's spirituality, understanding of church teaching and its applications pastorally, those competencies really are needed across all of those areas of formation. And our office often works closely with the USCCB Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church to promote those competencies. And you see an example of that in the book that's listed there. So I want to highlight the 4 areas of mandate of our subcommittee from the Bishops' Conference in light of all that. The subcommittee establishes procedures and conducts reviews and approvals for certification standards, competencies, and procedures, those that are voluntarily submitted by diocesan formation programs at the request of the bishop. They could also be submitted by regional or state Catholic conferences or diocesan coalitions. They can be submitted by national Catholic ministry organizations with the approval of their executive director, as long as they're nonprofit organizations who appear in the official Catholic directory. Thus, the subcommittee works closely with all of these groups who are seeking to have their standards for preparing and forming ministers for today's church reviewed for best practices, using co-workers, the standards of the Alliance, other resources and specialized competencies for ministry roles to guide that process. Currently, among all of the approved programs of the subcommittee, we have parish-based leader roles, campus ministry, hospital chaplaincy, in healthcare ministry settings of various types, veterans chaplains, and soon, we hope, prison ministry volunteer leaders. Number 2, the subcommittee also seeks to give voice within the conference of bishops and with those whom we work with outside of the conference to the priorities and concerns of the bishops related to formation for ministry. For example, we're seeking approval to have an action item in the fall meeting of the bishops to promote discussion of needs related to lay ecclesial ministry, recruitment, formation, certification, and authorization, all of those things that are part of co-workers, especially looking to see what the impact of the current pandemic has been. And we're also seeing what some professional surveys of lay ministers, clergy, bishops might help us know about the state of lay ecclesial ministry in the country. These activities all help contribute to the first task of the subcommittee to identify and share those best practices by reviewing certification standards. The third item is also related. We promote and resource certification. What I'm doing speaking to you today is part of that, along with developing our website materials, other resources, print and digital, promoting anything that can help in the formation of ministry leaders, most of whom are lay ministers, but some of whom are clergy in special roles, such as chaplains or campus ministers. And then finally, we offer consultations to diocesan representatives, formation programs, bishops, and other organizations across the country on request in areas related to ministry formation and certification. When you write it down in summary on a slide, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it definitely keeps the subcommittee and our office very busy. I also find it helpful to take a moment to explain what the subcommittee doesn't do, because there's often some confusion on these points. So we don't accredit academic programs of theology and ministry. Now, previously, there was an independent commission of the USCCB called the Commission on Certification and Accreditation, which did accredit those institutions. But in the reorganization of the Bishops' Conference in the 2000s, they decided that there was no need to continue to do that because they wanted the Bishops' Conference to focus more on providing guidance to help those schools be aware of certification standards that could help align those academic programs to ministry skills. Plus, there are other organizations, academic organizations, doing accrediting for those schools. So, second thing is the subcommittee also doesn't certify, neither for special ministry roles nor for lay ecclesial ministers generally. Even co-workers says that the term lay ecclesial minister is a sort of generic term that is used to describe a group of people. But when one is certified, you're certified for a particular skill or role, not for a general category. Thus, the procedures the subcommittee approves don't certify a generic lay ecclesial minister, but rather they certify for a particular role, like director of music ministries. That's also a best practice. Certification is always about acknowledging specific skills and specific competencies. Additionally, the USCCB doesn't certify individuals for particular roles either. It works with the diocesan programs and the organizations to acknowledge candidates as certified. They are the certification agents that do that. When those programs are approved by the subcommittee, they can offer those certifications under the seal of the Bishops' Conference and acknowledgement that that approval is endorsed by the USCCB subcommittee. And finally, the subcommittee also doesn't authorize persons for particular ministry roles. It's the exclusive function of the diocesan bishop to do that. Co-workers provides guidance for bishops on the best ways to do that, as do we, but each bishop must determine how to establish those protocols in his diocese. And speaking of dioceses, there are dioceses and national ministry organizations with whom we have approved certification standards. Here are the dioceses and a couple of those organizations. The roles are different in each diocese, for example, though several of them have similar roles that are approved for certification, such as catechetical leader. Some have unique roles not found in other places. For example, the Diocese of San Bernardino has certifications for pastoral associates in the role of Life and Dignity Coordinator, as well as Charity and Justice Coordinator. Two pairings that are both very integral, but which we don't have within national standards. They created those based on best practices in other areas. And so that shows how each diocese can have unique certification roles, but also ones that are common with other places. And for the common ones, resources like the Alliance help dioceses can determine the shape of their own standards and programs. They can use that information as a resource. Of course, the Catholic Campus Ministry Association and the National Association of Catholic Chaplains are two organizations that serve a specific group of leaders, campus ministers and chaplains. And as I've already mentioned, there is the Alliance. Many of the standards of certification of the organizations on the previous page are based on the standards of the Alliance, which is why we refer to those standards as national certification standards. Our subcommittee works especially closely with the Alliance, and you can see their website link there, and of course NPM is a proud member. What the Alliance is the coming together of these 5 organizations for the purpose of coordinating certification efforts together that would be harder for those organizations to do individually. The Alliance, as established in the 2000s for that purpose, but their collaboration goes back further. Each of those organizations is responsible for a particular set of specialized certifications in the roles you see here. NPM, of course, offers the certification for Director of Music Ministries, which I'll touch on again in a moment. But before I do, I'd like to quickly share first about some recent work we're doing with other groups and some of the ways that that work is shaping how we're considering certification and the needs for certification going forward. This is always an ongoing area where we continue to grow and learn new things. 2 groups we're working with are in a strong collaborative relationship with the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, one of our approved organizations. Those other organizations are the Partners in Pastoral Care and the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, seen here. Information about them is at those links, but to summarize, we're working with them to establish competencies for eventual certification in specialized pastoral care ministries beyond the hospital setting, in nursing homes, for the homebound, others with acute need, elder care. And we're also working on establishing competencies with the CPMC, the Prison Ministries Coalition, for prison ministries volunteers, eventually expanding that to full-time prison ministry chaplains. We hope that these can be national certifications, but also ones that, again, can be resourced in individual dioceses to tailor for their own needs. So as we do all that work, we are understanding more about the need to create different pathways to ministry formation and certification beyond the professional ministry degree, which has for a long time sort of been the gold standard. It always has been, and we realize that it's always going to be, but the diversity of our church and the ways in which people are coming forward, seeking ministry, education, and formation, invites us to consider other levels than the professional, which include formation appropriate for their situation, opportunities for online education, small cohort groups in parishes, and other ways that we can help them achieve some initial or even slightly more advanced levels of certification. The Catholic Campus Ministry Association, the Partners in Pastoral Care, and the Prison Ministries Coalition have developed certification competencies that reflect this sort of developmentally focused approach. And here's an example of it. It's often depicted in the form of this spiral, which highlights how growth in ministry isn't about, career or climbing a ladder, but of deepening levels of development and commitment. The terms we have here, foundational, commitment, and leadership, are conceptual and loose, but meant to reflect that after one has had an introduction to key skills in an area of ministry and practiced and grown, they may be ready to make a commitment in some full-time role, such as a paid position, which can enhance their training further. And as their growth continues, they may exercise leadership with responsibility for and with other ministers in their field. It reflects that process of growth and development. Moving through these developmental stages can make it possible for the minister to pursue that professional certificate eventually at the graduate level, the leadership level, and to be certified with that credential. So those are some of the recent developments and some of the work that we're doing at the subcommittee level. So now let me highlight NPM's USCCB approved certification for Director of Music Ministries. I'll talk a little bit about the process and the specialized competencies, the value of seeking certification as a Director of Music Ministry, and the ways in which those competencies can be of value to those music ministers with whom you regularly collaborate. First, the requirements. Now, if you visit the Alliance page for NPM, and the link is there, you can review those in more detail. And remember that these requirements are for the specialization for Director of Music Ministries. In addition to these, there are core competencies that all Alliance members require for anybody seeking certification, and you can check those out in more detail there. But I'll just make a few comments about the procedures. First of all, the cover letter. You can always get a sample cover letter from NPM's certification committee or those responsible for certification. There are examples that you can use, so you don't have to make something up from scratch. Initial submission of documents via portfolio. The Alliance has worked over the last couple of years to make this an all online process, so you'll want to inquire with NPM about those details. The clock hours and the credit hours indicated there reflect what is comparable for professional ministry leaders among the other Alliance certifications as well. They're based on the equivalency of a master's degree in liturgical music, theology, or a related discipline. Now, equivalency is a key word in that you don't need a master's degree to demonstrate that equivalency, just that it's preferred. You have many ways in which you can demonstrate that equivalency. And in the process of creating your portfolio, you're going to be required to probably produce video recordings of your music, other forms of demonstration that help demonstrate those skills. While there are guidelines and clarity about what you need to produce, the way in which you present that is not always one size fits all. So NPM has skilled, certified leaders to mentor and walk with you through the process. That way you know what to expect along the way and you're not doing it alone. Now here we have the specialized competencies for directors of music ministries. These are the ones that will be evaluated by your peers through the NPM Alliance certification process via the portfolio materials that you submit. I list them out on these next slides, and they're available on the Alliance and NPM websites. But I want to take a look at them now and think about the importance of these skills for other music ministers, not just yourself. Maybe for those preparing to be certified as cantors or song leaders. NPM offers those certifications as well. You know, those certifications are not approved by our subcommittee because they haven't been submitted by NPM for that. Only the DMM, the Director of Music Ministries, has been submitted. But it's possible that NPM may wish to add them later on. Bear in mind that these competencies, along with the core competencies that I mentioned before, reflect the best of what expert and long-term music ministers, theologians, other ministers, and bishops themselves have said make for the best trained ministers in the field. I think that even if you're not pursuing a certification as a DMM, these can be very valuable for you, for your choir members, to know about, perhaps even to reflect on. Consider just a few of them in context. Number 2, have knowledge of and competency in the historical treasury, contemporary body, and multicultural expressions of church music, etc. It's good for choir members to know the diversity of music and musical styles in our tradition, not just from today, but through the whole history of the church. It's good for them to understand, especially those who might be primarily attracted to one type of music or another, that we need to understand the whole of it. We need to understand contemporary styles of liturgical music from different cultures, and that we need to make all of those part of our music ministries, especially in our increasingly intercultural church. Number 3, on the knowledge of liturgical history and documents on the practice of liturgy and of music. There's a lot of development from the Second Vatican Council onward that all those in music ministry should have some exposure to. The idea, for example, of the threefold ministerial determination around the use of music and liturgy, brought out by several church documents, Is the music solid as music? Is it pastorally appropriate for an assembly to sing? And is it theologically appropriate? Um, there's a lot of thought that has to go into choosing music for liturgy, and the musical aspect of it is only one. Does the music reflect the capability of the assembly to sing it? Do the words reflect a proper theology of Eucharist and liturgy, or any other aspect of theology? And are the words or images um, possibly inadequate in helping the people understand those theological truths? I know many of you are possibly preparing music for online streamed masses during COVID-19 and have had to think about those considerations, as have places that have opened with more limited singing due to the pandemic. Since it's likely now very limited in terms of instrumentalists and singers who can be there for health reasons, your repertoire for liturgy may have had to change. Um, and the theological evaluations may be different during this time as well. If it's a streamed mass and no one other than the priest participates physically in the act of communion, does a song about bread and wine and Eucharist in that sense fit that moment? Or is there something else, some other song that maybe expresses a more expansive vision of Eucharist and the understanding of Eucharist that's reflected in the liturgical documents in that broader sense? Being able to understand the need to consider these things and to develop skills in doing that also, ties into number 5, developing the art of music as integral and necessary to the sacred liturgy. We're in a moment where music is being expressed in a different way in our masses because of the pandemic. How does instrumental music fit into the liturgy now? Maybe in a way that it didn't before the pandemic. Just things to think about. All of these skills also tie into number 8, being able to vision a plan for the parish for now and into the future for these areas of ministry. I think these competencies are a treasure trove of ministerial reflection, not only for you, but for those whom you work with and collaborate in ministry. These skills are all the ones that NPM, our bishops and your peers, say are needed for those who are asked to lead our communities in song and in vision regarding liturgy and music. The process of certification, along with your membership in NPM, gives you the ability to highlight your own efforts in this regard, to learn from others during the certification process, to both get affirmation for what you're doing, and to maybe learn about other resources and approaches to your work that can be helpful. Now, a lot of people will often ask me, what's the value of certification? What's the purpose of it? What do I get out of it? Well, for the minister, even as we always encourage stronger efforts to standardize concrete financial or career benefits, we want to recognize that certification does help the minister develop their skills and their chosen area of specialization in the context of a cohort of peers and mentors. Those who have gone through the certification process in dioceses or national organizations in other areas of ministry leadership, they speak very highly of that experience, especially with regard to the camaraderie and networking that it establishes among their peers. Remember, too, that certification is for a fixed period of time, usually 7 years, and then you're invited to renew and update that certification by showing how you have continued to grow as a minister over the intervening years. It helps keep that conversation and that networking going. And that renewal is simply that, an updating of that portfolio you established, not the submission of a whole brand new one. Now, you might think that certification isn't something that you need now personally, especially if you've been in your leadership role for many years without it. As you think about that, it's also good to consider doing it because you can become a mentor to others who will follow you. Or you can at least learn more about the process to guide those who might be closer to the start of their ministry work. It'll help them to consider it and give you a chance to mentor them. Most ministers who do pursue growth in their own ministry do so because they were encouraged to do so by a peer in their field. And of course, you'll be recognized as having achieved a level of competence in your field that is recognized in a formal way by NPM, the USCCB, your peers, and your own bishop. In fact, if you are certified or planning to be, you might encourage your NPM regional leader, for example, to make sure that they keep in touch with your local bishop or bishops and let them know when you get certified. My experience working with bishops is that they are always gratified and encouraged when they see ministers in the church taking an active role in their own professional development. Doing so can help us build towards that future further acknowledgement and concrete support we want certified ministers to receive from our bishops. Ministers being recognized as certified also allows us to demonstrate on a national level how dioceses identify competent ministers for key leadership roles, and it enables us to then more broadly encourage those types of common standards and procedures throughout the entire national church. For those dioceses that may have a more informal formation program in place, we can show them how certification is based on professionally acknowledged standards that prepare better and accountable leaders. Put another way, certification promotes a culture of mutual accountability, which we know is so needed in our church today. And promoting and seeking certification for ministry leaders enables collaboration with other institutions, graduate programs in theology and ministry, for example, other programs providing a framework for ministry formation. Certification standards can be a helpful guide in their own assessments. So yes, we have a lot of work to do in promoting the rightful place and the concrete support of lay and other ministry leaders in the life of the church. That's a long-term effort, to be sure, but it's supported by the efforts of lay ecclesial ministers and others to pursue competency-based ministry formation and certification. Working together, we can follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit in shaping the church in the pattern of service which Jesus laid out for us in the Gospels through the example of his own service and his own ministry. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that the takeaways I noted at the beginning are the ones that you got out of the presentation, and I hope I was able to answer some questions you had when you started, and maybe ones you thought of as we went along. I want to thank you again for your work in music ministry, in other ministries where you are building up the life of the church, and I'm so grateful for you letting me be a part of your NPM convention experience and a part of your day. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to me at my contact info below for follow-up or just to chat more about NPM, our subcommittee, ministry certification, or anything else. I'll be glad to hear from you. God give you peace.